At family dinner, parents assigned my sister to my apartment, so I let a stranger open the door. It wasn't the kind of dinner where you expect fireworks. It was just another Sunday, the kind my parents insisted on keeping sacred even as the world crumbled around their illusions. Same ceramic plates, same lemon vinaigrette that Mom swore by, same half-warm conversations about the weather or gas prices or whatever could be discussed without digging too deep. The thing is, I've never been the one to make scenes. I learned early that silence could protect better than shouting, and that disappointment, if worn calmly enough, could pass for composure. That night, I wore my best mask. I smiled when my mom kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired. I nodded when my dad, barely glancing up from his phone, said hey in that distracted tone that always made me feel like a guest in my own family. And I sat down across from my sister, Camilla, who didn't bother to look up at all. That wasn't new. What was new came halfway through dinner, when the room quieted just enough for my mother to fold her napkin, place it beside her plate, and say the words that still echo when I think back to that night. "We've talked it over," she said in that voice she uses when she's already made a decision and is only pretending to ask. "And Camilla will be moving in with you for a while, just until she gets back on her feet." She said it like she was announcing dessert. My father didn't blink. Camilla smirked without lifting her eyes from her phone. They were all waiting for me to object, to resist, so they could call me ungrateful or selfish or cold. But I didn't. I smiled. Just a little, not wide enough to be sincere. "If it helps Camilla get back on her feet," I said lightly. "I don't see why not." My mother blinked. My father exhaled. Camilla finally looked up, smugness blooming across her face like a stain. No one noticed how still I went after that. No one asked why I didn't protest. They thought they had won. But what none of them knew, what not a single person at that table bothered to ask, was that I hadn't lived in that apartment in weeks, and the man who would be opening the door for Camilla wasn't me. My name is Carol G. I'm 29 years old, a marketing strategist working remote for a tech firm based in Austin. Though I live in New Mexico now, I don't advertise where. I used to live in a nice 2-bedroom condo just outside of Albuquerque, the kind of place with gated parking and in-unit laundry and a balcony that caught the morning light. I bought it myself. No cosign, no down payment gift. Just spreadsheets and discipline and nights I didn't go out because the mortgage came first. I had plants on the windowsill. I had furniture I assembled with my own hands. I had peace, until my family made it clear they thought it belonged to all of us. Camilla is 2 years older than me, but for most of our lives, that's only been true on paper. She has a pattern, big dreams, short follow-through, messes that somehow become other people's to clean up. She's been a yoga teacher, a wedding planner, a life coach. Now, she's between passions, as my mom puts it. And each time one of her reinventions collapses, it's me they call, because I'm the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who won't yell. I used to think that was love, that being the fallback was some kind of compliment. Now I know better. The day I bought that condo, I cried in the parking lot, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I thought I had finally earned space, my own space. I lit candles that night and didn't tell anyone. I painted the walls myself and didn't ask for opinions. And for a while, it worked. Until the first time Camilla got evicted and Mom said, "You've got a second room." Right, just for a week. Then it was 6. Then it was tension and dishes in the sink and a mysterious dent in my door I never got an explanation for. When she left, they made me feel like I'd failed her, when I asked them to stop assuming I could always be the solution. They told me I was not being very sisterly. I stopped arguing, and a few months ago, I stopped telling them where I lived. The decision to move wasn't sudden. It was slow, like how a house settles at night, creaking under its own weight. I sold the condo to a quiet man named Jaden who worked in security and wanted a fresh start after a divorce. I didn't tell my family. I didn't offer an address. I didn't leave a forwarding notice. I moved into a modest rental on the east side, small enough to clean in 1 hour, big enough to feel mine. When the realtor called to confirm the closing, I felt something I hadn't in years: relief. So when I sat at that table, watching my family assign my space like I was a tenant in my own life, I didn't push back. I just said yes, because I knew exactly what would happen when they showed up. The messages started Monday morning, just like I knew they would. First, a cheery text from Mom, asking if I had an extra set of sheets for Camilla's bed. Then one from Camilla herself, pretending to be casual but failing, hinting that she'd bring her own kitchenware so she wouldn't be a burden. It was laughable, but not in a funny way. The last time she borrowed my kitchen, she left my cast iron pan soaking overnight and turned it to rust. But I didn't reply. I didn't correct them. I let the story they'd built keep going because, for once, I wasn't part of it. They were speaking to a version of me that no longer existed, a version that opened her door even when she didn't feel safe inside it. By Wednesday, the updates got more specific. My dad texted that he'd be loading the moving truck Friday night and that Camilla was really looking forward to having her own space. There was something about that line that stuck. Her own space. The irony was almost poetic. The space she was about to walk into didn't belong to either of us anymore, and the man who'd greet her didn't owe her anything. I thought about texting them back to clarify, to give them time to regroup. But then I remembered how many times I had tried to draw boundaries before, how many times I had asked for understanding and been met with guilt instead. So I let the silence stretch. Thursday night, I turned off my work laptop early and sat on the floor of my new apartment with a bowl of leftover pasta. The room was quiet except for the occasional sound of the building settling. I looked around at the bare walls, the second-hand couch I'd found on Facebook Marketplace, the tiny dining table that wobbled slightly when I leaned on it. Nothing fancy, nothing Instagram-worthy, but every piece was mine. No one had picked them for me. No one had claimed a part in building this space. That was what made it enough. The next morning, I left early. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I didn't want to be anywhere near that condo when the storm hit. I drove without a destination, windows halfway down, radio low. I stopped at a farmer's market I never go to, walked past stalls of peaches and handmade candles, bought nothing. It felt good to move through a crowd without needing to explain myself. Around noon, I sat in a small cafe and let my phone buzz in my pocket. By the time I checked, I had 5 missed calls, then 7, then 10. The 11th one I picked up. It was my mother's voice. Not soft this time, but brittle and sharp. "There's a man here," she snapped. "He says he lives in the condo, says you don't live here anymore." I didn't rush to answer. I let the weight of her words settle, let the panic grow in the space between her sentences. Then I said, "I don't." There was shuffling in the background, the sound of bags hitting pavement, my father's voice rising in confusion, Camilla muttering something I couldn't make out. "You didn't tell us." My mother hissed. "You never said a word." "No," I said calmly. "I didn't." She asked what this was, her voice tight with a mix of outrage and disbelief. "I sold the condo," I replied. "Weeks ago." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. What I moved out," I said, quietly. No one asked where I lived, so I didn't say. The silence that followed was long. I imagined them standing there, bags on the curb, plans unraveling, realization setting in. Finally, my father's voice broke through. "You lied to us. You said she could move in." I didn't raise my voice. I said, "If it helps Camilla get back on her feet, I don't see why not." I never said where. I could hear the shift then, the sound of someone being yanked out of denial and forced into clarity. Camilla stepped forward, her voice shaking not with confusion, but with rage. "This is petty. Carol, you always act like you're better than us, but this is just cruel." I tilted my head, voice still even. "You packed up your life and showed up to move into someone's apartment you didn't even confirm still existed. That's not cruelty. That's entitlement." Her voice cracked. "You're my sister." I nodded slowly. And you've spent years confusing that with free housing. That was the moment I knew the mask had slipped. Not mine. Theirs. They had always assumed my kindness was permanent, that my silence meant consent, that my support came without limits. But they were wrong. They had just found the door closed for the first time, and they didn't know what to do with that. My father stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "We're not leaving. You owe this to your sister." There it was, the unspoken contract, the lifetime of favors, of money wired without thanks, of phone calls answered in the middle of the night. They thought it added up to ownership. I reached for my phone. My mom's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I dialed. 3 rings. Then the voice of a calm dispatcher. 911. "What's your emergency?" My voice didn't shake. "I have family members outside my apartment who are refusing to leave. They're not on the lease. They weren't invited. I'd like to report trespassing." My sister's mouth fell open. My father cursed. My mother looked at me like I'd slapped her, but I didn't flinch. The patrol car pulled up 10 minutes later, just as I had expected. It was almost funny, in a grim, quiet way, how predictable they were. My mother pacing with her arms folded, my father standing stiff like he was preparing a speech. Camilla slouched against the car with her arms crossed and face tight with fury. When the officer stepped out, she looked between us, hand resting near her belt but clearly relaxed, reading the room with practiced calm. "We received a call about trespassing," she said. I nodded without looking away from my family. That was me. She turned slightly to them. "Ma'am, sir, I'm going to need you to vacate the premises. This is a private residence. You're not on the lease." My father's face turned red. "This is our daughter. This is a family matter." The officer didn't flinch. "And this is her legal residence. You're not permitted here without her consent." Camilla looked like she might scream or cry or collapse. And honestly, I wasn't sure which one I would have preferred. She turned toward me, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "You're going to regret this. Do you know what people will think of you? Do you know what they'll say? I didn't break eye contact?" "Yes," I said. "They'll say I finally stopped opening my door." My mother gasped like I'd hit her, but I didn't flinch. I had said yes too many times when I meant no, made too many excuses for behavior that should have been addressed years ago. I had allowed them to call it kindness when it was really silence, and I was done. The officer stepped between us, gently guiding them toward the curb. My father started to protest again, but she cut him off with a calm warning. "If you don't comply, we'll have to escalate. I'm asking you to leave peacefully." Camilla muttered something about lawyers under her breath. My mother looked like she wanted to cry, but couldn't find the tears. Eventually, they turned, slowly, reluctantly. They got into the car, the trunk still filled with Camilla's things, and drove off without another word. I stood in the doorway for a while after they were gone, not because I was shaken, but because I was still, fully still, for the first time in years. That night, my phone lit up with missed calls, 12 in total, 5 from my mother, 2 from my father, the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. But I could guess. Cousins, family friends, people who hadn't texted me in years but now suddenly felt qualified to weigh in. Then came the texts. "Why would you do this to your sister? Your mom is heartbroken. Camilla is sleeping in her car. Is that what you wanted?" I didn't reply. I just scrolled. The guilt was familiar, so familiar, in fact, that I had once mistaken it for love. But this time, I saw it clearly for what it was. Pressure dressed up as care, obligation wrapped in a ribbon of family. Later that night, I saw it, a Facebook post, public, from my mother, 3 paragraphs long, punctuated with heartbreak emojis, and a photo of Camilla as a toddler in a sundress. It started with, "We raised both our daughters to care for each other, but one of them has forgotten what that means." It ended with, We're heartbroken that Carol, so successful, so fortunate, would turn her back in our time of need. Dozens of comments followed, some from old neighbors, some from people I hadn't spoken to since I was 13, calling me selfish, cold, ungrateful. It wasn't new, just louder. I stared at the screen for a long time, not hurt, not angry, just tired. Then, for the first time in my life, I responded, not with words, with receipts. I posted a thread, no hashtags, no emojis, just facts. A screenshot of the bank transfer I made when they couldn't pay their mortgage, the car loan co-signed in my name for Camila, the collections notice when she stopped paying, a redacted copy of the lawyer's invoice for her DUI, a photo of the closing statement from the condo, a message Camilla had sent me 2 years ago calling me a boring robot for not letting her crash for a month. I ended the thread with one line: I didn't abandon my family. I just stopped volunteering for emotional debt. Then I turned off my phone, not out of fear, not because I was bracing for backlash, but because I didn't need the noise. For once, I had made a decision and didn't need to defend it. That night, the apartment was quiet. No hallway footsteps, no buzzing phone, just the hum of the fridge and the creak of the old pipes expanding and contracting with the air. I made tea, chamomile, not to sleep. I didn't need help sleeping anymore, just for the ritual, the warmth, the pause. I held the cup with both hands and let the steam rise, soft and slow, like forgiveness I never asked for. The strange thing about clarity is how quiet it can be. I always thought that drawing the line would feel loud, that setting boundaries would come with yelling or tears or at least a slammed door. But it didn't. It came in silence, in the space between messages I never replied to, in the weight that finally lifted from my chest without anyone noticing. For years, I had been the good daughter, the dependable one, the quiet achiever who didn't ask for much and always stepped up when things went sideways. I thought that made me loved. I thought being useful was the same as being seen. I was wrong. Growing up, Camilla was always the center of gravity in our house. Her mistakes turned into family emergencies. Her dramas rewrote everyone's schedule. When she failed, she wasn't blamed. She was comforted. When I succeeded, it was expected, not celebrated. The double standard wasn't written down anywhere, but I could feel it in the way my mother said, "She's just having a hard time," and in the way my father asked, "Can you just help this once, even when it was the 5th or 6th time?" Every once stacked on top of each other until it became a pattern, a job I never applied for, but somehow couldn't quit. At 24, I paid Camilla's bail when she got arrested for driving without a license. No one even asked if I had the money. They just told me where to send it. At 25, she borrowed my car and wrecked it. She blamed the rain. I covered the deductible. My parents said it was an accident and that she was lucky to have a sister who understood. At 26, I helped cover their mortgage for 2 months when my dad's hours were cut. I didn't complain, but I also didn't hear thank you. Just silence, like it was a natural extension of my role. By the time I was 28, I had learned to say no, not often, just occasionally. I tested the word like it was a foreign language. Sometimes they accepted it, reluctantly. Sometimes they ignored it. Either way, they never stopped asking. The moment I realized things had truly shifted was smaller than you'd think. It wasn't the condo sale. It wasn't the police showing up. It was the night I sat on the couch in my new apartment with a grocery store candle flickering beside me and realized I didn't feel anxious. For the first time in years, I didn't have to brace for a favor. I didn't have to plan for damage control. I didn't have to explain myself. The phone was off, the inbox was empty, and I was alone by choice, not by exclusion. That was the difference. When my thread went public, the reactions were immediate. Some people apologized. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 5 years messaged me saying she was sorry she had believed the Facebook version of events. A few strangers commented that they'd gone through something similar and had never found the words for it. But most stayed silent. I didn't need an apology from every person who judged me. I didn't post for them. I posted for myself. To remind myself that my memory was valid, that my version of the story mattered, even if it wasn't pretty. Camilla didn't reach out. I thought she might. She'd always been good at flipping the script, at crying when things didn't go her way, and convincing everyone she was the one who had been hurt. But this time, she didn't play that card. Maybe because the thread made it harder. Maybe because she realized something had shifted in me that wouldn't shift back. Or maybe she simply didn't know what to say now that the old tools didn't work. I wish I could say my parents changed after that. They didn't. A week later, my mom posted a follow-up. This time, the tone was softer, but the message was the same. A daughter should never turn her back on her family. Blood is thicker than water. The usual phrases that sound deep until you realize they're often used to excuse harm. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading it. I just closed the app and made dinner. Garlic pasta, a small salad, a glass of wine. It tasted better in silence. People think boundaries are walls, but they're not. They're doors. And I had spent too long leaving mine open to people who walked through without wiping their feet. I used to think choosing myself would make me lonely. What I didn't realize was that I had already been lonely, just surrounded. There's a difference. I started to fill my space with things that reflected me, not the version they expected, books I loved, not ones Camilla mocked, art I picked out slowly, not prints gifted out of obligation. Even the way I lit my apartment changed, softer, warmer, like I was finally inviting myself home. The story, of course, continued without me. Families like mine don't end stories. They rewrite them, in their version. I'll always be the ungrateful daughter, the cold one, the one who left when things got hard. I've learned to live with that, because the truth is, I didn't leave. I just stopped standing still. And for once, I didn't ask for permission. There's a moment after everything explodes when people expect you to feel victorious. Like now that you've finally stood up for yourself, drawn the line, said the hard thing out loud. You should feel proud or relieved or even free. But that's not how it felt. What I felt was something closer to exhaustion. Not dramatic or loud, just bone-deep stillness. Like my body had finally dropped a weight I didn't even know I was carrying. That weight had a name. It was family. It was love. But only if I earned it through sacrifice. It was years of being told I was the lucky one. So I should give more, bend more, carry more. When I stopped doing that, they didn't just act confused, they acted betrayed. Because in their eyes, my silence had always meant permission. In the days after the Facebook post, I stopped checking my phone altogether. I stopped logging into the family group chat. I stopped replying to the people who said, "You should just talk to your mom," or "Camilla's hurting." You know, I stopped trying to explain what had been happening for years in a family that liked to pretend things were fine as long as we didn't say they weren't. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. What I felt was something colder, but also more honest. I was done, not in a slamming the door kind of way, just in a walking away and not looking back kind of way. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to prove a point. I just wanted peace. And that meant distance. A week passed, then 2, then 3. I kept waiting for the guilt to return, the way it always used to, like clockwork. But it didn't. Not the same way. It came like a ghost at first, in small moments, like when I passed a sale rack and instinctively thought, Camilla would like that, or when I made too much soup and almost considered freezing some for my parents. But then I'd remember how those gestures always became expectations, and how expectations always became burdens I never agreed to carry. So I let the thoughts come. Then I let them go. One afternoon, about a month after the condo scene, I ran into Jaden at a coffee shop downtown. He looked surprised, but not uncomfortable. He asked how I was. I told him I was well. He said the building was quiet, the neighbors were decent, the water pressure was better than he expected. I laughed at that. It was a small exchange, maybe 5 minutes long. But when I walked away, I felt something shift. That condo wasn't mine anymore. It wasn't my secret burden or my family's assumption. It was just real estate, a space that had been passed on. The emotional cords tied to it were finally cut. And that more than anything else. Told me I was actually moving on. Sometimes, I'd get updates without asking for them. A cousin would mention that Camilla had moved back in with our parents. Someone else would say she was looking for another job or trying to get a roommate, but none of it landed the way it used to. I no longer felt responsible for how her life turned out. I had spent so long absorbing her chaos that I forgot she was capable of making choices too. Good ones, bad ones, her own. And that was the most radical part of stepping away. Realizing that I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was just giving them back their ownership, their agency, their mess. The hardest part wasn't the backlash or the isolation. It was learning to sit in the quiet without trying to fill it. For years, I'd used caretaking as my identity. Fixing things was how I stayed needed, and being needed was how I measured worth. Letting that go meant facing myself without the armor. It meant waking up on a Sunday with no one to please, no fires to put out, no texts demanding urgency disguised as love. It meant learning to ask, what do I want, and not feeling guilty for answering. I started writing again. Nothing serious, just short thoughts in the margins of books or scraps of paper on my fridge. I started walking in the evenings without a destination. I started remembering that solitude isn't the same thing as loneliness, most of all. I started rebuilding my sense of self in small, quiet ways, not for a social post, not for praise. My mother still hasn't called. My father sent a birthday card 2 months late. Unsigned. Camilla tagged me in a story once. A quote about sisters and forgiveness. I didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Because forgiveness, to me, isn't about re-entry. It's about release. And I had released all of them, not out of cruelty, but out of preservation, because love without respect is just manipulation in disguise, and I had finally learned the difference. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind that's neither quiet nor loud, just thick with the kind of stillness that makes you pay attention. I had just finished watering my plants, the ones on the windowsill that now bloomed without anyone mocking how much I cared about something small. The sky was a soft orange, the street below humming with the low rhythm of traffic and someone's music bleeding faintly from a passing car. I was putting away a dish towel when the knock came. 3 quick, clipped knocks. Not aggressive, but purposeful, the kind of knock that came with a story someone needed you to hear. I didn't rush to answer. I stood there for a moment, just listening. The knocks came again. I walked to the door, slow but steady, and looked through the peephole. It was Camilla, alone, no suitcase this time, no parents hovering behind her, no fake smile, just her, arms folded tightly across her chest, shifting her weight from one foot to the other like she wasn't sure how long she'd be welcome even in the hallway. I opened the door halfway, not wide, not closed, just enough for us both to see it was a choice. She didn't speak right away. She looked thinner. But not from struggle, from quiet. Her hair was tied back messily. Her makeup was gone. She looked like someone who had finally run out of performances. "Can we talk?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. I let the words sit between us. Then I stepped back just enough for her to enter. She walked in slowly, like someone entering a room she used to know but no longer felt sure about. She glanced around. The space was modest, clean, lived in. Mine. She sat on the edge of the couch, not comfortable, not defensive, just there. I sat across from her and waited. She fiddled with a ring on her finger, then took a breath. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I don't need anything. I just—" She trailed off. I didn't fill the silence for her. She cleared her throat and continued. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything before that. And I realized I never really saw it from your side. Not fully. I think I confused closeness with access, and I assumed that because you always helped, you always would." I said nothing, not out of coldness, just out of choice. Letting her speak meant letting her carry the weight of it. She went on. "Mom's still upset. She thinks you embarrassed us. Dad's quieter. He doesn't talk about it, but I've been thinking about something else, about that day at the condo. I was mad. Yeah, But I wasn't surprised. Not really. I think part of me knew you were done. I just didn't want to believe it. She paused again. Her voice cracked slightly. Not from drama, but from the weight of finally being honest. I'm sorry. For the way I treated you. For thinking your life was mine to lean on any time I fell. For acting like your boundaries were optional. The words landed, not like a grand apology, not like a fix, but like a window opening in a room that had been sealed too long. I nodded slowly, letting the moment stretch. Thank you, I said. I needed to hear that. I didn't offer more. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not a path forward. Just truth. Quiet. Steady. Earned. She nodded too, then looked around again. You look happy here, she said softly. Not just peaceful. Whole. I didn't smile, but I felt it. I am. She stood. I won't take more of your time. I just wanted to show up. Not with excuses. Just truth. I walked her to the door. She paused in the frame. You don't have to reply to anything I send. I won't be offended. I just wanted to say it to your face. When she walked away, I didn't feel relief or regret. I felt grounded, like something had shifted, not just between us, but within me. I didn't need to repair what was broken to be whole. I didn't need to let her back in to prove I wasn't bitter. Some doors close without malice. Some silences aren't punishment. They're clarity. Later that night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. The air crisp but kind. The city moved below me, quiet, constant. A neighbor 2 floors down walked his dog and looked up. I waved. He waved back. It meant nothing. And everything. That gesture, small and unremarkable, felt more real than years of being praised for my silence. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I was just done performing. Done earning love like it was rent. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't care who rewrote the story, because I knew how it really ended. Not with revenge, not with applause, just a woman in her own home, with her own name on the lease, finally choosing herself without needing permission. I used to think resolution meant a big conversation, a breakthrough moment where everything clicked and the people who hurt you finally saw it from your side. But the longer I live, the more I realize that real closure doesn't come from someone else suddenly understanding. It comes from no longer needing them to. After Camilla left that evening, there was a strange quiet that filled the room. Not the kind that makes you uneasy, but the kind that lets your body relax into the air around you. I didn't cry. I didn't replay her words over and over. I simply breathed. And in that stillness, something settled. Not forgiveness, not bitterness, just release. That weekend, I bought myself a small bookshelf. I'd been meaning to for months, but kept putting it off, thinking there were more important things to focus on. But standing in the store, running my fingers along the edges of the wood, I realized this was one of the few times I was buying something just for myself. Not out of need or obligation, but out of quiet joy. I took it home, set it up with a screwdriver and patience, and filled it with books I loved. Some I'd already read 3 times, some I hadn't touched in years. But every spine on that shelf felt like a piece of me I had let go of in the past, now slowly returning. In the days that followed, I started noticing how much space I had reclaimed, not just physically, but emotionally. There were no half-read group chats draining my battery, no requests disguised as check-ins, no anxious countdown to a favor I'd be expected to say yes to. The absence wasn't sad. It was clean. It was calm. I went back to journaling, something I hadn't done since college. Just a few lines every morning, sometimes a list, sometimes a memory, sometimes a thought I wasn't ready to say out loud. It felt like I was rebuilding a private language, one that didn't require validation or approval. One night, I got an email from my aunt, the one who always played mediator. She didn't take sides, she said, but she thought it was time I made peace. That family was complicated, and silence didn't solve anything. I read it twice, then I closed the tab without replying, not out of coldness, out of certainty. What she didn't understand was that silence wasn't a punishment. It wasn't passive aggression. It was a boundary, a declaration, a decision made after too many conversations had gone nowhere. Sometimes not responding is the kindest way to end a cycle. I saw Camilla again a few weeks later, briefly, at a mutual friend's baby shower. We nodded across the room. That was it. No confrontation, no small talk, no fake laughter. Just a quiet acknowledgement that we had once been closer and now we weren't. And it was okay. People talk about heartbreak like it only happens in romance. But losing the version of your family you hoped was real can split you wide open in ways no partner ever could. And yet, that day, standing under pastel decorations and tiny cookies shaped like teddy bears, I realized something important. I was no longer trying to fix it. I was no longer hoping she'd change or waiting for someone else to tell her what I couldn't. I wasn't stuck in the story anymore. I had simply stepped out of it. That night, I walked home instead of driving. It was late and the streets were mostly empty. The city lights reflected softly on the sidewalks, and for the first time in a long while, I noticed how alive everything felt. A dog barked in the distance. A bus hummed past me, almost empty. Somewhere a window was open, music playing faintly in a language I didn't understand, and I thought, this is what peace sounds like. Not applause, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just space, just air. People still ask me if I regret how I handled things, if I wish I had said more, done less, softened the blow. The truth is, I don't regret it. I regret waiting so long to choose myself. I regret how many versions of me I erased just to make others comfortable. I regret thinking that love had to be earned by sacrifice. But I don't regret the silence. I don't regret the boundary. And I don't regret walking away from a role I never agreed to play. Now when the phone rings, I check it without dread. Now when someone knocks, I don't flinch. Now when I sit alone at my dining table with nothing but a cup of tea and a quiet room, I don't feel empty. I feel whole. There's no victory in this. No grand finale. Just the slow, steady return to myself. Just the kind of story that doesn't end with a lesson, but with a truth that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is nothing at all. Just stop showing up to be used. Just let the door close. And then, finally, let yourself stay on the other side of it. It took me years to understand that some people don't actually want to know you. They want a version of you that's convenient for their narrative. Someone who stays in place while they rewrite the story around you. That was who I'd been to my family. Not a person, a role. The reliable one, the backup plan, the emotional sponge, the problem solver, the one who didn't need anything. So it made sense to keep taking from her. And I let them. Not because I was weak or unsure, but because I had been taught from a young age that love is quiet sacrifice. That being good means being small. That asking for space is selfish. But giving up space without question is love. It didn't start big. It never does. It started with small requests. Stay late to help Camilla with her resume. Let her crash just a few nights while she gets back on her feet. Pay a utility bill just this once because Mom's check was late. Then it became assumed that if something fell apart, I'd fix it. If someone made a mistake, I'd cover it. If anyone needed a place to land, I'd be the net. No one asked if I had the energy. No one asked if I had space. They just handed me the weight like it was my inheritance. The worst part wasn't the demands. It was the disbelief every time I said no. Like my refusal wasn't an answer, but a betrayal. Like boundaries weren't allowed from someone who never used to need them. They made it about character, coldness, distance, selfishness. Not about self-preservation. Not about the quiet unraveling that happens when you are only loved for what you provide. And for years, I absorbed it, smiling through dinners that felt like performance reviews, laughing at stories that always ended with Camilla being misunderstood or unlucky, nodding while my parents subtly reminded me that at least I had it all together, so I could afford to give more. But people don't break all at once. They leak, quietly, slowly, in missed calls you don't return, in dinners you decline with a polite excuse, In the moment, you realize you dread going home more than staying alone. That's when the shift starts. That's when you begin to wonder what your life would feel like if it were actually yours. Not shared, not borrowed, not something you were managing on behalf of everyone else. Just yours. When I sold the condo, I didn't tell anyone because I knew what it would become. Not a new chapter, a crisis, a betrayal, an act of selfishness against people who had spent years expecting access. Not because they earned it, but because they were family. I kept it quiet not to be sneaky, but to be safe. To finally have something in my life that wasn't debated, questioned, or compromised. I needed one space that was mine before I could even remember who I was in it. They never asked why I moved, not really. They asked why I didn't tell them, why I disrupted their plans, why I chose distance. They never asked how I felt when Camilla's DUI became my problem, or what it cost me when my credit got hit because she didn't pay the car loan I co-signed, or how it felt to get a mug that said "World's Best Daughter" after paying their mortgage, I think. Deep down, they assumed I didn't feel anything, that I was built different, that silence meant strength, but silence, for me, was survival. It was the only way I could stay in that family without shattering. The moment I truly changed wasn't the day I called the police. It wasn't the thread I posted. It wasn't even the night I drank tea in peace. It was the first morning I woke up and didn't brace for guilt. I just breathed. I brushed my teeth without mentally preparing for an apology I didn't owe. I checked my email without anxiety. I made coffee because I wanted it, not because I needed to stay awake after a night of emotional exhaustion. That morning, I realized something I'd never dared to say aloud before. I didn't owe anyone access to me just because we shared DNA. That kind of realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness. And in that stillness, you start to hear your own voice again. Not the version shaped by guilt, not the version edited for approval. Just your voice. Clear, steady, unapologetic. I didn't become someone new. I became who I would have been if I hadn't spent years trying to earn basic respect from people who never thought to offer it. And once that shift happened, I couldn't go back. Not even if they begged, not even if they cried. Because peace, once felt fully, is not something you bargain with again. People often think that once you tell the truth, the story is over, that once the receipts are posted, the silence is made, and the doors are closed. Everyone will move on. But what they don't tell you is that when you stop playing the role you've been assigned, people don't just adjust, they rewrite. They don't sit with the truth. They rearrange it, twist it, cast themselves in softer light and you in something colder, sharper, easier to blame. That's what started happening behind the scenes after the condo incident. I didn't need to hear it directly to know it was happening. I felt it in the way mutuals pulled back. I saw it in the subtle comments left on posts from people who never used to care but suddenly had strong opinions. I wasn't surprised. I had spent enough time in silence to know how loud resentment gets when you refuse to play along. Camilla became the sympathetic one, the girl who tried, the sister who was misunderstood. I became the one who changed, the one who cut herself off, the one who used to be kind. And I could have corrected them. I could have reposted, re-explained, re-litigated every choice I made. But I didn't, because I learned something valuable during those weeks of silence. You don't have to argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't have to defend your peace to the people who benefit from your chaos. And most of all, you don't have to tell your truth more than once. The rest is their work, not yours. One afternoon, I bumped into someone from my past, a girl I used to go to school with who had ended up working with my mom at a local library. She looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure if she should smile or pretend not to know me. Eventually, she said, "I heard things got tense with your family. I just hope everyone's okay." Her tone was careful, soft, the way people talk when they want to gossip but also want to seem like they care. I just nodded. "We're finding our space," I said. That was it. No defense, no detail, no shame, just the truth. In the most neutral way possible. She didn't press further. People rarely do when they don't get the reaction they're hoping for. The funny thing is, once you stop explaining yourself, you realize how much time you used to spend doing it. You notice how many conversations you used to walk into ready to justify your needs, how many apologies you rehearsed before you even opened your mouth. That kind of exhaustion doesn't look dramatic. It just makes you smaller, quieter, more careful than anyone should have to be. When I let that go, I didn't just reclaim time. I reclaimed tone, energy, breath. I stopped treating peace like a luxury and started treating it like a right. A few months after everything, I got a birthday card from my mom. It came without a return address. Just my name in familiar cursive and a plain envelope. Inside was a short message, written like she was trying not to say too much or say the wrong thing. I hope you're well. I miss you. We're still a family, even if it's messy. Love, Mom. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in a drawer. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just let it be what it was. A gesture. Maybe sincere. Maybe strategic. Either way, not a door. Just a note. And I had learned not to mistake those two things anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to change. That was the difference now. I wasn't measuring my growth against their reactions. I had stepped out of their rhythm entirely. I had stopped reacting to their pulls, stopped chasing resolution in places that never offered it. What I felt instead was something slower, more grounded, a kind of internal agreement that I would no longer shrink for anyone, not even for the people who once convinced me that shrinking was the price of love. Healing isn't a comeback. It's not a dramatic return where everyone finally claps and admits you were right. It's walking into your own kitchen, cooking dinner in silence, and knowing no one's coming to ask for a piece. It's sitting on your own couch, lighting a candle for no reason other than it smells good, and realizing this is what your life feels like without performance. It's not loud, it's not vengeful, it's not even proud, it's just true. So, yes, maybe I'm the villain in their version of the story, the one who broke the pattern, the one who stopped saying yes, the one who didn't let her sister move in, who didn't show up to the reunion, who didn't explain herself loud enough to be forgiven. And I've made peace with that, because I didn't come here to be liked. I came here to live without begging for space. These days, when people talk about my story, they still lower their voices. They ask around the edges of it, never quite directly, like they're afraid of what it says about them if they understand me too quickly. I hear things in passing, moments where someone says I disconnected, that I changed, that I used to be easier, but I don't correct them. I don't try to reframe the image they've drawn, not because I don't care, but because I've finally realized something simple and sharp. I don't have to be understandable to people who never tried to understand me in the first place. There's this idea that standing up for yourself has to be explosive, that claiming space requires shouting, burning bridges, leaving destruction behind. But for me, the loudest thing I ever did was stay quiet. Not the silence of bitterness, but the silence of choice. A silence that says, I no longer owe you an explanation for protecting my peace. A silence that doesn't mean distance forever, but boundaries for now. A silence that was born from too many years of being the version of myself they could use, edit, misquote, and still expect to show up smiling. I walk differently now, not like someone on edge, bracing for the next request wrapped in guilt. I walk like someone who knows her time is hers. I take calls when I want to, not when I feel obligated. I answer messages without that tightness in my chest, because I know I'm not available to be managed anymore. I've taken all the versions of me they constructed and laid them down one by one. The fixer, the responsible one, the quiet daughter, the one who understands. They don't fit anymore. I've grown too much to wear them comfortably. The people who really know me now don't ask what happened with my family. They don't need the timeline or the details. They feel it in the way I pause before I speak, in the way I weigh the word, yes, like currency. They respect the edges of my life because they were never entitled to the center of it. And in that kind of relationship, there's room for truth. There's room for grace. There's room for the kind of care that doesn't demand repayment. Sometimes, I still hear Camilla's voice in my memory, not in anger, but in that moment at the door, when she said she always thought I'd say yes. I think about that line more than I probably should, because in it is everything I needed to understand. I was never expected to say yes because I wanted to. I was expected to say yes because I always had. My change wasn't a betrayal, it was an interruption, a refusal to keep bleeding for people who never once asked where it hurt when I smiled. One day, maybe things will shift. Maybe my mother will understand that loving someone doesn't mean demanding they stay small for your comfort. Maybe my father will see that quiet doesn't always mean agreement. Maybe Camilla will learn the difference between leaning on someone and draining them. But whether that happens or not is no longer my burden to carry. I've put it down, gently, completely, without the need for applause or approval. I didn't write this story to convince anyone. I wrote it because stories like mine are more common than anyone admits. People think boundaries are battles, but sometimes they're just doors you choose not to answer anymore. And that choice isn't cruel. It's sacred. It's the moment you realize your life doesn't have to be a constant negotiation, that choosing peace isn't the same as giving up, that walking away from what harms you isn't weakness, it's wisdom. I didn't vanish. I didn't become cold. I just stopped explaining my warmth to people who treated it like a utility. I stopped opening my door to anyone who knocked with expectation instead of care. And I stopped shrinking my life so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable around my clarity. So now I ask you, the ones still performing, still bracing, still saying yes when everything inside you aches for a no, how many times do you have to abandon yourself before you finally choose to come home,